Hi, my name's Theron. And this past Father's Day, my own dad and brother screamed at me, right in front of everyone, for refusing to give up the condo I bought with my own money. They said I was selfish, disloyal, not a real part of the family. But what if I told you this wasn't just about a barbecue? What if I told you they'd been planning it for years, erasing my name, rewriting history, taking credit for what I built, one signature at a time? I didn't raise my voice that day. I raised something else. Now they're locked out of the very house they tried to steal from me. And it all started with a seat they didn't want me to have. Would you like to hear how it ended? I hadn't planned on staying long at the barbecue. In fact, I nearly turned around in the driveway. Something about the invitation felt more like a subpoena than a celebration. Still, I parked by the curb in Highland Bend, clutching a store-bought pie and six-pack, and made my way around the side gate. Smoke curled over the cedar fence, and the sound of a propane grill clicking made me pause just a second longer. Inside the backyard, people were scattered around like pieces on a board someone else had arranged. White fold-out tables, red plastic cups, a big Happy Father's Day banner swaying slightly in the breeze. I scanned the crowd. Garrison, my father, stood near the grill, inspecting meat like he was back commanding troops. Alaric, my older brother, was performing. That's the only way to put it. Talking loud enough for everyone to hear, gesturing like a politician. When he saw me, he barely blinked. "Didn't think you'd show, little brother." I gave a small nod and smiled, holding up the pie. "Didn't think you'd need me to?" He didn't laugh. He just turned back to his circle. I looked around for a seat and realized the only one open was a plastic folding chair tucked awkwardly behind the trash bin. Everyone else had those white resin patio chairs that matched the tablecloths. I set the pie down on the buffet table, no one even glanced at it, and walked to my designated corner. I sat, facing half the backyard, half the fence. I sipped a warm soda. No one came over. Not even cousins I'd known since diapers. The conversation swirled around me but never touched me. I wasn't surprised. This was how it always was. Present but optional. They said my name twice. Once when Alaric recapped his latest business venture. If only Theron would let us do something productive with that midtown condo. And again when Dad joked, "Still playing the lone wolf, huh?" I smiled each time like it didn't sting. Then came the toast. Alaric stood, clinking his glass with the back of a butter knife. "To legacy," he said, "to those who build it and those who support it, wholeheartedly." Laughter. Glasses raised. I raised mine too, but didn't drink. Garrison added, "And to those who know when to let go of what holds the family back." People chuckled again. My plastic chair creaked as I shifted my weight. I looked down at my plate, barely touched. The pie sat untouched, too. Alaric's wife was passing around a cheesecake she'd bought from a bakery. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something settled in my chest like a stone, sinking through thick water. I looked around, taking in the whole scene. Every table, every conversation, every eye that purposely avoided mine. The sun dipped lower, washing the yard in golden light. Shadows lengthened across the grass. Someone turned on string lights, and the whole place twinkled like a scene from a lifestyle magazine. Except for my seat, in the shadow, behind the trash. I stood up quietly, brushing off my jeans. No one noticed. Alaric called out again, half laughing. "Don't disappear, Theron. We're just getting to the fun part." I paused, turned back slightly, then shook my head. "No worries," I said. "I'll catch the rerun." Garrison raised his glass again, still grinning. "To family." I nodded, but said nothing. My keys were already in my hand. As I passed the buffet, I picked up the pie and tossed it in the trash without breaking stride. They didn't notice. Or maybe they did, and chose not to react. Either way, I was done pretending I didn't hear what they never said out loud. I didn't storm out. I drifted, like smoke from meat left too long on the grill. My steps were measured. I didn't slam the gate or raise my voice. I didn't throw the pie. I just left it on the buffet table, knowing it would end up in the trash anyway. When I got home, I peeled off my shirt and tossed it into the hamper. The smell of charcoal and smugness clung to it. I washed my hands twice before pouring a glass of water and sitting at the kitchen table. It was past 9, and the condo was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing on Main Street. I replayed every word from that backyard circus. The toast about legacy, the sideways glances, Alaric's smirk, my father's dismissive tone. That chair behind the trash bins. I sat there like a child told to behave while the adults talked business. Except I wasn't a child, and this wasn't business. It was erasure, dressed in pleasantries and plastic cutlery. The next morning I tried to return to routine. Brewed coffee, skimmed emails, deleted a coupon for gutter cleaning. But the tightness in my chest hadn't left. By the time I pulled into the office parking lot, I'd already decided I wouldn't stay long. I needed air, space, not just from the building, but from the weight. At noon, I stepped out to grab lunch. As I passed the park 2 blocks over, a familiar voice called out, "Theron?" I turned. Reed Kavanagh, same crooked grin, now with gray at the temples. We'd gone to high school together. He owned a construction firm now, married with kids. We chatted about nothing. The heat, traffic, Houston roads. Then he said something that hit like a misplaced punch. "I always thought you got that scholarship to Penn. You were at the top of everything back then. What happened?" I blinked. "I didn't go. I stayed local." "Man," he said, shaking his head. "That's wild. Everyone figured you were a lock for that scholarship. Guess your brother got it?" I didn't respond. I thanked him for the chat, made an excuse about a work call, and walked back toward my condo with my heart doing a dull thud in my ears. Back home, I pulled out an old file box labeled college. Inside, yellowed papers, acceptance letters, program brochures, and a folded sheet I hadn't looked at in years. The scholarship offer wasn't there, but I remembered getting it. I remembered reading it out loud to Mom in the kitchen, her eyes welling up. So where the hell had it gone? I searched emails, paper files, backup drives. A few were corrupted, others missing. But one draft remained, an unsent email from Mom addressed to the admissions office. "Please ensure the scholarship stays in Theron's name. He earned it." The date matched the week Alaric suddenly announced he was leaving for the East Coast. He'd said it was for a surprise opportunity. I was too tired then to ask, too obedient to challenge. I leaned back in my chair, throat tight, staring at the cursor blinking in an empty reply box. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I just stared at the ceiling and let the pieces fall into place. The scholarship was never lost. It was stolen, and I was taught to smile through it. The next morning, I started building a new folder, physically and digitally. I labeled it Recovery. Inside, I dropped Mom's email, property records, timelines. Then I opened a new email and typed, "Victor, adding education records to our discovery list. I'll explain more when we speak." I didn't sign it Theron. I signed it T. Vexley. Clean, formal, like a man ready to enter a courtroom instead of a family reunion. The email sat open on my screen like an unanswered question. I stared at it for longer than I'd admit. Victor's name was typed into the to field. The message was short, just a note about adding education records to the list of discovery items. But my hands hesitated over the keyboard before hitting send. Once it was gone, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, the same water-stained panel I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. I needed to move, not physically, but mentally. The day was dragging, and I didn't want to slip into that kind of paralysis where I start second-guessing everything. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and stepped out. The city was buzzing outside, sirens in the distance, the thud of bass from someone's car stereo 2 blocks away, the whir of a passing skateboarder. I walked. No destination, just motion. My feet took me past the library, then the bakery where Mom used to buy cinnamon bread on Sundays. I ended up in front of an antique store I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Something about the chipped blue door and dusty window drew me in. Inside, I browsed without intent until I saw it. A framed black and white photo, old, sun-bleached, a family gathered on a front porch. The composition was near perfect. Except one detail caught me. The youngest boy stood slightly apart, half in shadow, his smile subdued. My chest tightened. I bought it without asking the price. Back at home, I pinned the photo beside my fridge, next to the sticky note that read, "They rewrote the past. I'll write the future." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. How long had this been going on? The scholarship, the condo pressure. None of this was random. It was a pattern. So I started tracing it. I pulled a yellowed folder from the back of my filing cabinet. It was labeled Family Misc. Inside were photos from old holidays, printouts of email exchanges, receipts from group gifts I'd chipped in on but never signed. One photo showed Alaric accepting an award with Garrison clapping behind him. I remembered that day, how Mom had taken the photo with my camera, how I was asked to stand off to the side to keep the angle clean. Another image showed a family Christmas card from years ago. Everyone in matching sweaters. Everyone except me. I'd been sick that week, or so they'd said, but the timestamp on the photo proved otherwise. I'd been there. I just wasn't asked to pose. I sat back and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about the condo. It never had been. This was about identity. Who got to be part of the narrative and who was edited out? I picked up my phone and scrolled through Alaric's public social media profiles. There were posts about family, legacy, unity, words that sounded noble but rang hollow now. Photos carefully curated, always centered around him, always featuring Garrison at his side. If Mom appeared, it was as a backdrop. I wasn't there. Ever. That's when I remembered the legacy wall in my father's house. A gallery of black and white family portraits framed in gold, lining the hallway from the entryway to the living room. I hadn't thought about it in years. The last time I stood there, I'd pointed out to Dad that my college graduation photo was missing. He'd shrugged. "Not everyone needs a spotlight, Theron," he'd said. I'd laughed it off then. But now it hit differently. I closed the app and turned off my phone. Then I grabbed a pen and wrote a single sentence on the back of the antique photo I'd just bought. Even shadows carry weight. Even shadows carry weight. That sentence stuck with me the next morning, scrawled in blue ink across the back of the photograph I'd pinned to the fridge. I stood in front of it, coffee mug in hand, the kitchen half lit by a cloudy sunrise. The fridge hummed softly behind me, as if trying to fill the silence that hadn't left since Reed brought up that scholarship. I took a sip and opened my laptop, still groggy but restless. My inbox had a few junk messages, a bill reminder, and then one from someone I hadn't seen in over a year, a former coworker who'd moved to Colorado. "Hey," the subject line read. "Saw this. Is that you?" The message contained a link to a short video on a local Facebook group. I clicked. There I was, standing behind the folding chair at the barbecue. Alaric's voice was loud, aggressive, Dad's tone sharp, dismissive. I watched myself blink through it, expression unreadable. 37 seconds of digital truth, uploaded by someone who must have been recording from behind the buffet table. The caption read, "This how families handle real estate?" I closed the video, then reopened it, then watched it again. By noon, it had a few thousand views, a growing thread of comments. Some were cruel, laughing at my posture, calling me weak. Others expressed disbelief. Why would a father humiliate his son like that? I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't share the video, didn't try to control the narrative. Let it live on its own. Let it breathe without my interference. That evening, needing space from the screen, I went for a drive. I didn't plan on going back to Highland Bend, but my hands turned the wheel without asking permission. I ended up parked 2 houses down from Dad's place, engine idling, windows cracked. From my seat, I could see the lights were on inside. A lawn service had come through. Freshly edged grass, the bushes trimmed down to neat boxes. The house looked peaceful, like any other upper-middle-class home on any other street. But it wasn't peaceful. It was sanitized, controlled, built on erasure. I didn't get out. I didn't need to. That's when I heard someone approaching. Slow steps over gravel. I rolled down my window halfway. Theron? It was Mrs. Swan. Idra, my parents' neighbor since forever. Older now, but her voice hadn't lost its edge. "I thought that was your car," she said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," I said. She leaned in slightly, not gossiping, just delivering information. "I don't know what's going on," she started, "but your brother's been over here almost every night this past week. Usually late, always carrying some kind of file folders, briefcases. Never uses the front door." I didn't respond, just nodded. "Felt odd to me," she continued. "Your mom, she used to say, if you have to sneak into a house, you probably don't belong in it." That line lodged itself into my chest. I smiled faintly. She said a lot of things worth remembering. Edra straightened her back. "Well, I thought you should know. You take care now, Theron." "I will," I said. And I meant it. Back at my place, I didn't go straight inside. I sat on the front steps, letting the air cool my skin. Streetlights flickered on in slow waves, one by one, stretching down the block. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. The city's heartbeat slowed after sundown. Eventually, I went in. I deleted the video link from my inbox. Then I opened a new tab and typed in, "Texas property law, forged signatures. Not for revenge, not yet. But if they were sneaking around behind closed doors, it was time I started opening a few of my own." After closing my laptop, I let the cursor blink on the empty document for a few seconds longer, then finally hit send. The message to Victor was brief but direct. I wanted a trail started, one that led back to the scholarship, and maybe further. As soon as I sent it, I felt the shift. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. It was early evening, warm with the kind of late summer humidity that clings to your shirt. I grabbed my jacket anyway and left the condo. I didn't need air. I needed proof. My first stop was the bank, not because I needed to withdraw anything, but because that was where most of the paperwork from my condo purchase had been notarized. I spoke to the woman at the front desk, asked to verify some signatures. She looked puzzled, but went to get a manager. The manager returned with a cautious smile. "Mr. Vexley, those records would be stored off-site, but if this is about a dispute, I suggest you speak with your real estate attorney." That answer only confirmed what I already suspected. People close to Alaric had started covering tracks. Instead of pushing, I thanked her and drove back across town. I didn't head home. I went to Mom's old storage unit. I still had the key. It took half an hour to find the right bin, Most of it was boxes of photos, kitchenware, books with torn spines. But in a file container tucked under old linens, I found what I was looking for, a folder labeled Midtown Purchase Originals. Inside, receipts, closing statements, tax documents, everything I'd signed myself, dated, time-stamped, logged with location. All official. I compared one of those documents to a scanned copy I'd found in my father's shared family folder the week before. They weren't the same. The signature on his version was too clean. The pressure marks didn't match the way I hold a pen. Even the date was wrong. September 19th. I wasn't even in Texas that day. I dug into my email and pulled up a thread from work, meeting confirmations, flight reservations, even a dinner receipt from Chicago. I had proof. I hadn't signed anything that day. Someone else had. And if I had to guess, they didn't even bother forging it well. They just counted on me never looking close enough. I took photos of everything, named the files, backed them up in 3 places. Then I added them to the folder I'd started labeling Recovery. The folder was getting heavy, digitally and emotionally. The next morning I called Victor. This time he picked up. "T. Vexley," he said. "I was expecting you." I didn't ask how. People like him always knew things before you did. "I need to meet," I said. "I have something." "You have a forged document," he corrected, "and the burden of proof is already tilting." He gave me a time. I hung up and sat back in my chair, staring at the small framed photo of Mom that sat by my desk. Her expression in that photo was soft, but her eyes had that same quiet knowing I remembered too well. I whispered to the room. They didn't think I'd check. They thought I'd nod and let it happen, like I always have. That night, I reopened the folder and printed a physical copy of the forged deed. I took a red pen and circled the notary date, the mismatched address, and the signature line. Then I taped it to the wall above my kitchen table. It hung there like a wanted poster, not to remind me of their crime, but to remind me that silence only works when no one's looking. They'd counted on my compliance. They'd counted on me being too passive, too quiet, too afraid to disrupt the family myth. But I wasn't afraid of making noise anymore. The morning after the call with Victor, I woke up with more clarity than sleep. The sun was barely over the skyline, but I was already showered, dressed, and staring at a drawer I hadn't opened in over a year. It was the drawer under the fireplace at Dad's house. Mom used to keep things in odd places. Insurance forms taped behind cabinet doors. Birthday cards pressed inside cookbooks. And once, after a quiet argument with Dad about something I couldn't hear, she pulled me aside and said, "If you ever need to understand what was really going on in this family, check the drawer under the fireplace." Back then, I chalked it up to another one of her poetic riddles. Now, it felt like a breadcrumb. It was still early enough that Highland Bend would be quiet. I drove over, parking 2 blocks away. I walked the rest of the way like a man not trying to be seen, even though no one was looking. The lawn was trimmed, the house still. No movement inside. I slipped the old key into the lock and turned it gently. The house smelled exactly the same. Lemon cleaner. Leather. Silence. I didn't linger. I walked straight to the den, knelt down, and pulled open the drawer. Inside was a small, dented tin box, blue with a faded floral design. It had a label taped across the top. LV. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were a few folded letters, a necklace I remembered her wearing when I was a kid, and a manila envelope with handwriting in her cursive, in case they rewrite history. I exhaled. The envelope contained a set of documents, one of them a copy of the original deed to the Highland house. The owner? Lenora Grace Vexley. Another paper was dated 6 months before her passing. It detailed a transfer of ownership she'd intended to file, giving me legal authority over any redistribution of property. There was also a short note, handwritten in blue ink. If they ever turn on you, this house is still yours, not out of revenge, but out of protection. You always saw things clearer than they wanted. Use that. I ran my fingers over the paper. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I sat there for a few minutes longer, cross-legged on the hardwood, letting the weight of it settle in. Then I scanned every page with my phone, backed it up twice, and returned everything to the envelope. I kept the note. Before leaving, I stood in the middle of the den, remembering her voice echoing off the walls, her laughter, the way she'd hum when she cooked, the way she never took up much space, but somehow filled the whole house. I left the house exactly as I found it. On the way home, I called Victor and let it ring twice before he answered. "What did you find?" he asked. "Everything." That night, I took the printed documents and laid them out on my kitchen table. I taped the original deed beside the forged one, side by side. Truth versus lie. Mother versus myth. Then I wrote one sentence across the top of a legal pad. They didn't expect me to open that drawer. I kept the note from my mother on the table for 2 days, rereading it every morning like a ritual. I memorized the ink strokes, the slight slant in her L, the way she looped her Y's. It was her voice on paper, cutting through everything. Victor called the following Monday. He didn't say hello. "They've filed a motion," he said. "Your brother's trying to preempt any claim to the Highland House. Wants it moved into a newly created LLC. Guess what the name is?" I waited. "Legacy Bend Partners," he said, drawing out the words like they tasted foul. That was Alaric, turning betrayal into branding. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I got up, poured myself some coffee, and let the silence hang. Victor took the hint. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything. They want to play legal? We'll play legal." I spent the rest of the day scanning and indexing every document, cross-referencing the forged deed with my mother's original. I labeled folders, color-coded timestamps. I wasn't building a case. I was preparing for war. That night, I drove by Dad's house again. This time, there were lights on in the study and 2 cars in the driveway. One of them was Alaric's, the Navy sedan with the tinted windows he'd leased 2 years ago, but claimed he owned outright. As I sat there, watching from a block away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've always been petty, but this is pathetic." No name, but I didn't need one. I let it sit there on the screen. No reply. Let the silence answer. The next day at Victor's office, he laid everything out like a man setting chess pieces. "They thought they could sweep you aside," he said, "that your silence meant surrender. But this," he tapped the deed with his pen, "this is fire." He showed me the motion filed by Alaric. It was arrogant in its construction. Claimed I'd verbally forfeited the Midtown property, that I'd made repeated assurances to the family I wouldn't contest consolidation. None of it was true. But it didn't need to be true. It just needed to be loud, on paper, formalized. Victor handed me a new file, our response. It was clean, airtight. My name, my documents, my mother's original trust declaration, witnesses, notary records, a complete timeline of forgery and concealment. "They didn't expect you to do your homework," Victor said. "They expected you to fold." I nodded. By the time I left his office, the sky had darkened. It wasn't raining, but the clouds sat low like they were holding something back. I went home, heated up some leftovers, and sat at the kitchen table with everything spread out before me. At 9:32 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Garrison. I opened the door halfway. He didn't look drunk, but his eyes were wild with something close to fury. "You really think this is the way to handle things?" he said without preamble. "You didn't come here to ask questions," I replied. "You came here to control the narrative." His jaw twitched. "Your mother, God rest her soul, wouldn't want this." "Don't use her," I said, keeping my voice level. "You erased her from everything once she was gone. Don't bring her back now like a shield." He stepped forward. I didn't move. "I built that house," he said. "I kept this family standing." "You built it on lies," I said, "and silence. Mine." He stared at me, as if trying to summon the version of me he was used to, compliant, soft-spoken, grateful. But I wasn't that man anymore. "You don't belong in that house," he said finally. "I don't want to belong in it," I answered. "I want the truth to." He turned and walked away. No words left. No retort. I closed the door gently behind him, then locked it twice. By the time Thursday came, the silence between me and the rest of the family had grown thick, like humidity before a thunderstorm. Not a word from Alaric since the forged LLC documents, and nothing from Garrison after that nighttime doorstep confrontation. But I knew they were scrambling. They weren't the kind to wait around. I spent the morning reviewing every page of Victor's compiled case file, drinking coffee slowly while the printer spat out the final copies. 3 stacks, 1 for court, 1 for personal record, and 1 for what I was about to do. By 11 a.m., I had changed into a charcoal blazer, packed the folder carefully into my briefcase, and drove to Highland Bend. Not to sneak around this time, but to ring the doorbell like I had every right. Because I did. Vivian answered. Her smile didn't even reach the corners of her lips. "Oh," she said. "You." "Where's Alaric?" I asked, stepping past her into the foyer without waiting for permission. "You can't just—" she started, but I was already halfway down the hall. Garrison's voice rose from the dining room. "Viv, who is it?" I turned the corner and found him standing at the bar cart, pouring scotch into a heavy-bottomed glass. Alaric was seated at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, reading a set of stapled documents. He looked up when I entered, eyes narrowing. "You're not invited," he said flatly. "That's never stopped either of you before," I replied, placing the folder on the table between them. "Thought I'd return the favor." Garrison took a slow sip of his drink, watching me over the rim. "What is this?" "Proof," I said, "that everything you filed, everything you signed, every property shift, every LLC you shoved into a P.O. box, it's all built on a foundation that doesn't legally exist." Alaric scoffed. "Please." I opened the folder and slid the first document forward. The original deed, notarized, my mother's signature crystal clear. Then the second, a copy of the forged one they filed. I pointed to the mismatched dates, the flawed notary stamp, the digital metadata. Then came the trust statement from my mother, her handwriting, her conditions, her last legal action before cancer took away her strength. "You think you can come in here with a pile of paper and tear down what we've built?" Alaric said, his voice rising. "You've done nothing for this family." "That's the thing," I said calmly. "You only ever saw what I didn't do for you. You never looked at what I did to survive the walls you built." Vivian crossed her arms. "This is going to tear the family apart." I turned to her. "You mean the family that erased my name from every photo? That locked me out of a trust I was written into? That humiliated me in front of guests over a condo you didn't pay a cent for?" Alaric stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "You're bitter." "I'm awake," I replied. For a long second, no one spoke. I took the final document from my briefcase, the formal court filing, time-stamped and prepped by Victor. I dropped it on the table like a gavel. "This is happening," I said. "You can choose to fight it, delay it, manipulate it, but you can't stop it. That house isn't yours, and it never was. Garrison stepped forward. You're playing with fire, son. No, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I'm walking through it, you lit it. I'm just not afraid of the smoke anymore. I turned and walked out. I didn't wait for them to call after me. I didn't need to see their faces. The quiet behind me was louder than any argument. And it was about damn time I stopped whispering. I didn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety. No, those days had passed. I stayed up reviewing the filing again, letting the weight of my mother's trust, my own name, and everything they tried to erase settle deeper into the bone. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it creeps in through the back door, quiet and undeniable. The next morning, Victor texted me 3 words. They're lawyering up. It didn't rattle me. It confirmed what I already knew. They were cornered. And people like Alaric don't admit fear. They just smear louder. By 10 a.m., the story broke online. An independent journalist I'd quietly passed documents to, screenshots, notarized discrepancies, excerpts from the trust, had dropped a report. The headline was clean, surgical. Family dispute exposes forgery in Vexley Property Trust. The article didn't name me directly, but everyone could connect the dots. Alaric's firm, Legacy Bend Partners, was listed front and center. The comments rolled in fast, half calling it a witch hunt, the other half saying it was about time someone exposed the hypocrisy. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up, stayed silent. A voice I hadn't heard in over a year filled the line. Quiet. Measured. Theron, Aunt Lee said. I just read the article. I waited. I'm sorry, I should have said something years ago. Your mother tried to tell us, but no one wanted to believe what it meant. I finally spoke. They were banking on that. Your silence. I know, she whispered. We all let her down. I didn't comfort her. I didn't need to. Her apology wasn't for my benefit. It was a confession. The rest of the day blurred into motion. Victor called again, updating me on their formal response. Alaric's lawyer was denying the allegations outright, claiming miscommunication, suggesting I was bitter, unstable, fueling fiction from grief. I laughed when Victor read that line aloud. Grief writes better facts than you think, I told him. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk around Midtown. I hadn't been back through the park since spring. It was quieter than I remembered. I sat on the same bench Mom used to love, the one near the duck pond. She once said, "People either inherit peace or build it themselves." I'd never inherited peace, but I was starting to build it. That evening, I got a message from one of Alaric's former business partners, someone I'd never met, but who had seen the coverage. He wrote, "If you're digging, you should know they moved funds through a holding shell last year. Check Ephraim and Tuller LLC. I think your name was scrubbed from the original formation." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the tip to Victor. An hour later, he texted back. "Found it. You were listed on the initial draft, then removed." I stared at the message, heart steady. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a house. This was about history, about the shape of a family that had quietly erased the parts it didn't want to claim, until those parts grew teeth. I stood at my window as night fell, watching headlights cut through the quiet street below. I knew they were scrambling, making calls, whispering about damage control, but it was too late for silence to work. They had written me out, and I'd made sure the world was reading. The next morning, a soft fog clung to the front yard as I stepped outside, clutching a thermos of coffee and a folder that had become my second skin. The dew had settled on the mailbox, and for a second, I imagined it belonged to the house on Highland Bend. But that one was still occupied, if only temporarily. Victor had scheduled a private session with the presiding judge before things reached open court. A procedural tactic, he explained, giving both sides a chance to present their initial positions without public spectacle. We sat in a high-ceilinged conference room downtown. The judge, a woman in her 60s with glasses that sat low on her nose, skimmed through each document without comment. Alaric wasn't there. His lawyer, a man named Hendricks, all cufflinks and veiled contempt, spoke on his behalf. "This is a family dispute being sensationalized," he said, voice buttered with legal jargon. "There is no malice here, only misunderstanding." Victor leaned forward. "Your client misrepresented ownership of a trust asset, forged documents, removed my client's name from corporate filings he was legally entitled to. This isn't a family matter. It's fraud." The judge didn't interrupt. She made a note, then nodded to me. "Mr. Hayes, anything to add?" I looked up, my voice steadier than I expected. "My mother built that trust to protect what she couldn't say out loud. She knew what would happen once she was gone. And they proved her right." Silence followed, heavy with implication. Afterward, Victor and I stood outside the courthouse steps. The gray sky overhead hinted at rain. "They didn't see that coming," Victor muttered. "They still think this is about the house," I said. He nodded. "And they're wrong." That evening, I received an email from a local paper requesting comment. I forwarded it to Victor. He suggested we wait until after the formal court date, but I had a different idea. I drafted a public statement. Not emotional, just facts. I was written out of a history I helped build. Now the truth is finally on paper. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The post gained traction. A few shares, then a few hundred. Strangers began messaging me, people I didn't know, but who knew what it felt like to be the sibling left out, the quiet one who watched from the margins until watching became survival. Around midnight, I received a voicemail from Vivian. "I don't know what you're trying to prove," she said, "but this isn't who you are. You used to be the one who held things together." I deleted it without saving. That version of me was long gone. The next morning, Highland Bend showed up in the county foreclosure notices. Victor called, a grin in his voice. "Alaric tried to refinance it under the LLC's name. The bank pulled the deal. You're still the legal owner. No lender's touching it now." I drove by that afternoon. The front lawn was unkempt. The shutters needed paint. A "for sale by owner" sign leaned slightly to the left, desperate. I didn't stop, just rolled past, windows down, letting the wind carry away the memory of every night I walked past this house, wondering why I was never enough to be let inside. But now they were the ones locked out. I stared at the subject line blinking on my phone. "You didn't have to go that far." It arrived 1 week after the courthouse filing, just past midnight. My finger hovered before I tapped it open. Inside, 4 short words. "I didn't think you'd actually do it. Guess I underestimated you, again." A familiar sting, bitter and hollow. I placed my hand against the cold wall, closed my eyes, and felt that same slow ripple of vindication wash over me. I'd expected anger or pleading, but there was only recognition. I had made them notice. Minutes later, I found myself surveying a draft reply. My jaw tightened as I typed, "You didn't just take the condo, you took time, credit, belief, and now silence." The words felt fierce, true. I paused. My thumb hovered over send for a long beat. Those 4 simple words would open conversation I didn't want. I deleted the draft. Some conversations belong to ghosts, I reminded myself. The next afternoon, a knock came while I was sorting mail. My cousin Emma stood on the threshold, 2 coffees in hand, early autumn light falling across her face. She stepped in without waiting. "Dad's furious," she began, voice low. "But Grandma said you did the right thing, that it reminded her of Lenora." My heart thudded at the mention of Grandma's name. Lenora, matriarch who held us together. I sipped the coffee she offered and nodded slowly, hiding relief. "She said that?" Emma just watched me, then shrugged. She always did appreciate fairness. I said thanks quietly. She stayed a while, offered small updates about family life, awkward reunions, dinner arguments softened by Grandma's quiet approval. Before she left, Emma hugged me and whispered, "You did good." That was enough. Later that weekend, I wandered through the farmer's market downtown, bags in hand filled with squash and kale. I paused by a stand where a little boy reached for tomatoes. His father crouched, offering guidance. That scene. I remembered my own dad doing the same for me once, before everything changed. A lump formed in my throat. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of fresh basil. Sometimes legacy is what we leave unsaid. I let the memory go. By evening, I was back in my condo, lights dimmed except a desk lamp. My phone rang, Victor's voicemail tone. I pressed play. His voice, quiet but firm. "Everything's recorded, filed, and final. Your name's clean. You're done." I listened twice. The last ring faded. Then I tapped to delete. Not to erase his words, but to remind myself I no longer needed them. I didn't need him to say I was right. I simply needed to stop letting him write my story without me. That night, I set my coffee mug on the windowsill, watching streetlights shimmer on damp pavement. I breathed out a long sigh. I felt lighter, maybe not forgiven, but free. And as I closed my laptop, I thought, I didn't need him to admit he was wrong. I just needed him to stop telling the story of us without asking me. 2 weeks after the verdict, the Highland house no longer belonged to the past. Its walls had been repainted, but not to hide anything, just to clean the slate. Where the porch had once held silence and suspicion, now stood a banner. The Lenora Grace Foundation, building quiet legacies. I stood on the front walkway, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors. They felt heavier than they looked. Beside me were volunteers, neighbors, a handful of people who had followed the story in the local press. Some curious, some invested, and a few who simply believed in the idea that something broken could become something better. When the ribbon fell away, the crowd clapped, not wildly but warmly. A soft release. The kind that acknowledges not just triumph, but the cost of getting there. Then, the small speaker beside the front steps clicked on. It was Mom's voice. "If silence is all you have left, make sure it's heard by the right people." A long pause followed. Not because the recording ended there, it continued, but no one was ready to breathe just yet. I hadn't heard her voice in so long that I forgot how gentle it could be, even when it was telling you hard truths. A few people in the crowd teared up. I looked up at the sky, clear and pale, as if even the weather knew not to interrupt. I stepped forward. "I'm not going to make this a speech," I said. "This house wasn't taken back to be lived in. It was taken back to be made honest again." That was all. I didn't mention names. I didn't assign blame. I left the microphone and walked into the house. Inside, the foyer smelled of fresh wood polish. A new frame hung on the wall to the left, one that hadn't been there in decades. A neighbor, Mrs. Swan, had handed it to me that morning. A photo from the 80s. Me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the front steps with Mom. She had her arm around me. We were laughing at something off frame. That photo had never made it onto the so-called legacy wall. Now it was the centerpiece. Later that day, a journalist asked to speak with me. Their article ran the next morning under the headline, "Silent Son Turns Mansion into Mission." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt returned. As if the weight I'd carried had finally been acknowledged, not by the world, but by the part of me that had been waiting to be seen. As the sun set, I walked back through the house one more time. The rooms were quiet, but not empty. I locked the front door, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Down the path, the photo was still in my hand. I'd meant to leave it hanging, but somehow I wasn't ready to part with it. I paused at the gate, looked back once, then stepped forward. I didn't take the house out of anger. I took it out of memory and gave it back in purpose. End of chapter 12. In the end, what I fought for wasn't a house. It was the right to exist in my own family's story. For years, I stayed quiet, thinking that silence would earn me peace. But the truth is, silence often protects the wrong people. If you've ever felt like the invisible one, like your voice didn't matter, let me tell you, it does. You are not weak for walking away from what breaks you. You are not selfish for demanding to be seen. Families can be complicated. Sometimes they're built more on appearance than on truth. But we get to decide what we carry forward and what we refuse to pass on. I chose to stop pretending. I chose to honor my mother's legacy, not the illusion my father and brother tried to maintain. Maybe your story isn't like mine. Maybe you're still sitting quietly at someone else's table, waiting for your turn. Maybe today is the day you finally stand up. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped build? And if so, what would it take for you to write yourself back in? If this story touched something in you, if you saw a piece of your own reflection, leave a comment with the number 1, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in. I read every word you share. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. More stories are coming. Real stories. The kind that remind us we're not alone. Because sometimes, the truth is the most powerful thing we own. And it's never too late to speak it.